This is Death, Lies, and Alibis. Hello, I'm your host, Christy. Out here in rural Ohio, the nights are quiet, but not always peaceful. Every silence has a name, and every shadow has a story. And every cold case carries a weight you can feel if you stand still long enough. Today, we step into another one of those stories, forgotten by some and never forgotten by others. So let's go together to where the questions are still hiding. Content warning. This episode contains discussion of homicide, domestic violence, suicide, opioid use, and sex trafficking. Listener discretion is advised. 16 days. That's how long Abby Lynn Butcher was missing before anyone found her. 16 February days, cold nights, unanswered calls. And when she was finally located, it wasn't where she said she was going. It wasn't on the route she planned to walk. It was behind an oil well. It was remote and dark, miles in the opposite direction. Her death was ruled a suicide. But when you start looking at the details, the weather, the clothing, the toxicology, and the timeline, well, that conclusion, it just doesn't sit as clean as it sounds. This is the story of Abby Butcher and the questions that refuse to stay quiet. Abby Lynn Butcher was born July 2nd, 1987, in Zanesville, Ohio. Now, if you're the baby of the family, you're going to really understand this. You're always going to be the little one, even when you're grown, and that was Abby. She loved baby blue, soft and comfortable, the kind of color that feels safe. She had this low, slightly graspy voice, the kind you'd recognize instantly. And if there was a pen nearby, she'd be doodling or writing in her diary. That's how she settled her mind. Music was her other therapy. Some days it was windows down, scream singing every word. Other days it was something quieter, low in the background, when she didn't have the energy to explain how she really felt. Now, she wasn't perfect, and she never claimed to be. She was impulsive and stubborn. She made choices that had people saying, Abby, Abby, come on. But she had this vibe about her, an energy that made people want to stay, even when life got messy. And her family doesn't remember her through paperwork or court filings. They remember her through snapshots of life, because that's how you keep them close to you. Abby was, without a doubt, a mama's girl. The bond between them, it wasn't casual, it was constant. It was strong. Her mom was her safe place, her anchor. She was that one person she could call when everything else felt unsteady. That kind of connection doesn't fade. Now, Abby grew up believing that Jim, the man who raised her, was her dad. And he was. He signed the birth certificate. He showed up. He stayed. So when she learned at the age of 13 that biologically it was someone else, it really didn't shatter because dad was already dad. Now, there's January. That's the oldest sister, and she's in the medical field, steady, calm in chaos. And then there's Lita and Riley. They're the middle sisters. Now, they walked through addiction seasons beside Abby later in life. It wasn't just Abby fighting alone because sometimes they were climbing, sometimes they were slipping, and sometimes they were trying again. It was messy, but they were still sisters, and they loved each other deeply. Her cousin, David DeMalt, is quiet, protective, the kind of person that doesn't talk much, but you know better than to test him when it comes to Abby. Katie, her stepsister, she holds into the everyday moments, the quiet things that never make it to the police reports. Abby's parents divorced when she was young, and that meant her childhood, it wasn't simple. There were different houses with different rules, learning to adjust at a young age. And when things become unsafe at her mom's house, she made one call to her dad, and he didn't hesitate. He got in the car and he brought her home. And after that, Abby bounced around between places that felt safe and steady. At 15, she lived with her cousin Melissa, and she would babysit, help raise her nieces and her nephews. She grew up faster than she probably should have. She graduated from New Lexington High School and bounced between New Lex and Junction City. She worked at Dairy Queen with fryer grease and vanilla clones, clinging to her clothes after a shift. And before February 16th, before the oil well road, before the arguing, before the speculation, her life, it was still moving. she was still trying to build something stable, trying to create solid ground. And that's where the next chapter begins with Jason. So Abby was just 18 when she moves in with Jason Rehart. And look, this wasn't some quick mess. They built a whole life. They had 12 years together. Not all bad, not even most of it. Jason still calls her his soulmate. And you can hear the hurt when he talks about her. Love doesn't just disappear. Jason says Abby was feisty, stubborn, but she was caring, and she could brighten a room or burn it if she felt cornered. Abby loved hard and lived hard too. Now, addiction stuck in, quiet. It started with legitimate prescriptions, the ones you think you can handle till you can't. When prescriptions ran out, the cravings didn't, and the trust cracked, fights escalated, and it's all about the surviving. Well, Jason got clean eventually, but they never really fully mended. They were on again, off again, circling each other. Even when he found out the two boys weren't his biological sons, he didn't bail, and neither did his mom, Gloria. She stepped up, loved those boys, and helped raise them. This case is about love and how addiction can drag even the people who care the most right down with it. And if you want to understand Abby, really understand her, you have to look at who she was as a mother. Before everything fell apart, Abby had been clean for almost a full year, a real year, not a half hearted try, and not a getting there stretch. She showed up to parks and playgrounds. They took trips to places like Lake Isabella and Burr Oak. They had sand in their shoes, snacks in the bag. Normal mom stuff you just don't think about twice until it's gone. She talked about getting her own place, about having all the boys under one roof, about doing it right this time. And she did the work. She went to doctor's appointments, baths at night, and she was particular about her kids. Clean clothes, hairbrushed. Details mattered to Abby because, well, that's how you protect what you love. She shared her music with them too. One song especially stuck out, Don't Laugh at Me by Mark Wills. That's still on her oldest son's playlist. That was Abby as a mom, teaching kindness, empathy, telling her boys not to bully, not to make fun of anyone different. And she wasn't just saying it, she was living it. She could be bullheaded. Anyone who loved her would tell you that. But she was grateful too. She said, I love you a lot, and she meant it. When Abby had structure, when she had support, real support, she did well. Jason and Gloria made sure the boys saw her, even in rehab, because the goal was always the same: keep her clean, show her a better way, and protect her kids. And even now, her boys are loved and they are protected. And this tells you something important. Abby didn't quit trying. She wasn't a throwaway story. She wasn't a cautionary headline. She was a mom and a daughter and a woman still pushing forward. And that changes how you understand what came next. Recovery is never straightforward, and grief, well, it doesn't wait for a good time. And in December of 2021, Abby's mom died, and that loss, it completely shattered her. She was a mama's girl and already hanging on by a thread. Then, weeks before she vanished, Abby had an accidental overdose at her sister Lita's place. It wasn't fatal, of course, but it was close enough to scare everyone. After that, people started watching her closer, checking in and worrying. Then came February 16th, 2022. Abby was at her dad's house. The family was there, and there was tension. It was thick in the air. You could feel it. Arguments were breaking out. Old stuff was bubbling up. Voices got louder. At some point, Abby ended up in her sister's car, pissed. She was overwhelmed and just done being told what to do. Her family was terrified. They truly believed she was one hit away from another overdose. In the middle of all that emotion, Abby made a decision. She said she was walking back to Nulex on foot in February with no coat and only house slippers on her feet. And she started texting, calling friends, calling family. She was desperate for a ride because Abby was no walker, folks. And if you knew Abby, once her mind was made up, that was it. This wasn't thought out. It wasn't planned, it was just her raw emotions and probably a little withdrawal, a need to escape that moment. But she did reach out and she called Gloria for help. But Gloria, she couldn't do it right then, and that's where the questions really begin. So, who picked Abby up? Who was with her? And for a little while, no one thought those answers would matter this much. At first, there wasn't a full blown panic. Abby had stormed off mad before. That was her thing sometimes. She escaped, cooled down, and came back when the air was cleared. So that first night, it wasn't a lot of worry and not a lot of alarm. People told themselves she'd call, she'd show up. She always did. But the next morning, it changed everything. When Abby's cousin Dave got a phone call, there was just one question. Was Abby there? Well, she wasn't. And that's when the fear really set in. The kind that tightens your chest and it doesn't let go. Calls started going out, mass texting, social media lit up. Friends and family started searching back roads, fields, driveways, anywhere Abby might go when she needed space. Prayers were begged for. People were frantic. And one thing stood out immediately. Abby's phone. It was silent. And that wasn't normal because Abby was one of those that lived on her phone. And then there was the land itself that was around her. Abby lived right on the edge of Wayne National Forest. That's dense woods, rolling hills, places where someone could disappear quietly and not be seen. Days dragged on. No Abby. A few possible sightings, but nothing solid. And everyone felt it. This wasn't Abby blowing off steam. This was different. You could feel it. And what's always stuck with folks is where the search happened and where it didn't. Because the spot where Abby was eventually found, well, we're told it was checked early on and cleared. And then a few days later, that's exactly where she turns up. 16 days in, February 26, 2022, a call comes in. Abby's been located. Her body was found behind an oil well off Reading Township Road 143, a lease road. It's remote and pitch black, not somewhere people just end up. And it wasn't even close to the route Abby said she was going to take. It was in the complete opposite direction. And when law enforcement arrived, the scene didn't explain anything. It did the opposite. 16 long missing days, miles from where she was last seen, and no clear answer for how she got there. Then came the hardest part, the knock on the door. Those words no family is ever ready to hear. The search was over. But the questions were just beginning, because now the timelines matter. The moments and the movements were critical. Every small detail was important. Where was Abby? Where was Abby during those 16 days? Who was she with? How did she get from point A to point B, really? And why there? Of all places, why there? The discovery didn't wrap this case up, it cracked it wide open. Because that location didn't match her plans, it didn't match her clothes, it didn't match her texts, and it didn't match anything we knew about Abby. Abby was last seen in Junction City with her sister Riley and her family. And then 16 long days passed. There was no massive search teams, just her friends and family. They drove back roads, walking the fence lines. There was checking the woods, calling and texting, praying. And while all of that was happening, a family's life was quietly splitting in two. 3 little boys growing up now without their mom. Let that settle in. As we talk about where Abby was found, 3 miles from where she started, behind an oil well. It was off Reading Township Road 143. That's a lease road. It's so remote, unlit, nowhere near the direction she said she was headed, so why was she there? When she was located, several details stood out immediately. She was wearing a gray t-shirt, underneath it a thermal shirt, and both had the same burn hole, same exact spot. And that tells us that the burn happened while she was wearing both those layers. There's a cigarette. It was almost fully smoked. It was found underneath her body, not beside her hand like she had been smoking it, but underneath her. That's just a small detail because people don't lay down on a lit cigarette on purpose. And the ash was documented to be on her shirt and her chest area, lining up with the burns. And yeah, Abby was a smoker. She was. But was that cigarette hers? Was it tested? Somebody else could have been there. She also had on red sweatpants, socks, and those slippers. In February. No coat, no boots. Nothing that suggested she'd planned to be outside long. Her phone was nearby. It wasn't hidden or smashed. It wasn't discarded. It looked like it was just laying there. That's the scene. And we move on from what Abby was wearing to the distance she was supposedly was able to walk dressed like that. Because this isn't just about clothing anymore. We're going to talk about the terrain. It's about the direction and the reality. We're told Abby walked roughly 3 long, winding miles from her dad's house to that oil well site. So I went up there. Not on Google Maps, not from my couch. I drove it, and I stood there. And I walked part of it myself, in shoes, and I had a coat on. And it was a halfway decent day. And I'm telling you plainly, this is not a casual stroll. From her dad's house to that oil well site is about 3 miles. And on paper, that doesn't sound extreme. But paper doesn't show you the isolation, how quickly civilization fades. It starts as a small town, paved roads, a few houses, some light. It feels normal. Then about a mile in, everything changes. The pavement ends. You're no longer heading toward New Lexington, the direction she allegedly said she was going. You're turning away from town, and it becomes a narrow, one-lane gravel road. There's no shoulder, deep ditches. There's flying curves and rolling hills. And then it just keeps going down, deeper into the woods. And the further you go, the quieter it gets. There's fewer houses, and then almost none. Wayne National Forest woods, the kind that swallow sound, the kind that get darker faster in the middle of nowhere. So we're supposed to believe Abby walked that, in slippers in February, in the dark. 3 uneven miles. I walked part of it prepared, and I felt exposed and uneasy. So the question isn't, could she have walked it? The real question is, does it make sense that she did? Now let's slow this down, because this is where the facts matter. We're going to discuss the autopsy, and we're going to do it with respect. Let's start out with the external exam and what it showed. It showed no broken bones, no defensive wounds, and no signs of strangulation. There was no bruising or blunt force trauma. And that's important because I want people to know there was no evidence that Abby had been beaten or physically attacked. But when the exam moved internally, things kind of shifted because they found pills in her stomach and her esophagus. They weren't digested yet or metabolized. That means she hadn't had them in her system for very long. And the toxicology revealed fentanyl, methamphetamine, gabapentin, and a strong, commonly prescribed anxiety medicine that slows the heart rate down. It calms the body, and on its own, it's often considered safe. But when you mix it with opioids or stimulants like she had in her system, it can become dangerous. The official cause of death was acute multiple drug toxicity. That's an overdose. And the manner of death was ruled a suicide. And here's where that language matters. Cause of death tells us what shut down the body. Manner of death, it attempts to explain how the situation happened. There's 5 manners of death. There's natural, accident, homicide, suicide, and undetermined. And another detail stands out. Abby was found outdoors in February, but her autopsy, it doesn't clearly document any findings that are typically associated with a prolonged hypothermia while alive. Now, I'm not saying that means that she wasn't exposed to the cold. It doesn't mean she wasn't outside. But hyperthermia, it leaves markers in the body while someone is alive, and those weren't clearly present. And that raises a difficult question. Was Abby alive in that cold environment for very long? Or was her body exposed to the winter temperatures after she was dead? The autopsy doesn't exactly answer that, but it leaves space for questions about the suicide ruling. Now, years earlier, Abby experienced a mental health crisis. She took some pills, and then she immediately called 911 on herself. Later, she wrote about that moment in her diary. Now, I was told the authorities reportedly reviewed her diary, so maybe what she did years ago was considered, but she never attempted it again. She probably wrote about it, but she never actually attempted it ever again. There's a medical term called passive suicidal ideation. This means wanting the pain to stop, whatever is going on, they're wanting relief. And the person doesn't want to actually do the dirt deed themselves. There's two different things there. And the people closest to Abby are firm in their belief. She would not have intentionally left those boys, and especially like that. So, in cause and manner, they feel misaligned. And when the environment and the body changes, well, that just raises questions. And that's where this case stops being simple and it starts demanding a deeper look. Now, let's talk about the weather because mid February in Perry County, Ohio, well, that matters because it isn't just a little chilly. Typical highs around here run in the upper 30s to the low 20s. The lows dip down into the 20s and sometimes teens at night. The air is really damp and the skies are gray. It's real winter cold here. And on February the 10th, the high was around 41 degrees. The low was near 25. It was above freezing that day, but cold once the sun goes down. But there was nothing extreme that happened, but it was definitely winter. Abby was found outdoors in that February, but the autopsy didn't clearly document the kind of findings you expect if she'd have been alive and exposed to the freezing temperatures for any length of time. Now, that doesn't mean she wasn't out there, but it raises real questions. Was Abby alive, then decided she was just done, and in her attempt, she OD'd with the residue of the pills left in her mouth, and she was smoking a cigarette. Then she passed out on top of it, and then laid there. And then there's this. I was told Abby, by several people, Abby was afraid of the dark. Now line that up with where she was found. A remote lease road. No streetlights, no houses nearby, just woods, silence, and darkness. That's not somewhere you casually wander. And it's not in the direction she said she was going. So when people say, well, maybe she just walked off, okay, but walked where? Because when you stack the cold, the location, and what the report doesn't clearly show, the simple explanation starts to weaken. And once it weakens, you're just left with harder question. If Abby didn't walk herself into that darkness, how'd she get there? Before we move forward, we need to acknowledge something that happens in almost every case we cover. Names start circulating, and that's what happened here too. People mention Abby's sister, Lita and Riley, and friends Lexi McMillan and Courtney Rennick. Now, let's be clear. None of them have been charged with anything, and this isn't about accusations. What connects them to Abby is their closeness and their shared history, their shared struggles. Allegedly, addiction was touching their lives all at the same time when Abby disappeared. And that's important, not as proof of wrongdoing, but as a part of the environment Abby was in. Now, Lita, she did speak with me. She was open about arguing with Abby that day and the guilt she carries over how things ended. That guilt, it doesn't fade. When I asked difficult questions about her and Riley and about them knowing more than they've said or being involved, things got tense, and I understand that. No one wants their name tied to a tragedy like this. But asking questions isn't the same as accusing them. It's a part of trying to understand when the pieces don't fit. I reached out to everyone the best I could. Some chose not to respond, and that's their right. My goal wasn't to corner anyone. I just wanted to hear Abby's story from every angle. Because when answers aren't clear, grief doesn't reunite people sometimes. It divides them. And questions start forming. Who knew what? Who saw her last? Could anything have been done differently? Those questions don't come from spite. They come from pain. And pain can make people defensive, quiet, and distant. And that means this case is heavy. And when case feels heavy like this, when emotions are raw and details don't line up, that's usually where we need to look closer, because that's where the truth is either hiding or waiting. So let's slow this down and really put this together. We have the weather, cold nights, winter air that bites, and temperatures that drop fast once the sun's gone. We have what Abby was wearing: house slippers, no coat, nothing that suggests she could be outside for very long. And we have the autopsy. No signs her body fought prolonged exposure while alive. We have the toxicology report, a mixture of substances that together can shut down the body quickly. And we have actions and stories that just are not adding up. When you lay all of that out side by side, one possibility starts standing out more than the others. Abby maybe had overdosed somewhere else, not on that lease road, not alone in the open dark, and not after walking miles in the February weather. That version asks the evidence to stretch too far. What makes more sense is an enclosed space like a house or a vehicle, somewhere where Abby didn't have to fight the cold while she was alive. And then there's the part that refuses to line up no matter how you look at it, where she was found. Behind that oil well on a remote, unlit lease road. And once you consider that, the story shifts. Because if Abby overdosed somewhere else, and what came next wasn't about addiction anymore. It was about fear and panic. Because the moment someone realizes things had gone bad, and instead of calling 911, instead of asking for help, and instead of treating Abby like a person whose life still mattered, a decision may have been made. A choice between doing the right thing and protecting oneself. Was Abby moved? That question doesn't automatically mean murder. It doesn't mean someone intended to hurt her. Someone might know who she was with. Someone might know how she got to that road. That knowledge could exist. And silence won't erase it. Time won't erase it. And fear definitely won't erase it. The truth has a way of surfacing quietly at first and then all at once. And Abby deserves that truth. Before Abby became a case file, before her name was spoken in past tense, before decisions were made in rooms she never stepped into, Abby was loved deeply. And she wasn't alone in this world the way she was found that day. Outside of her family, there's a circle of women who stood beside her with life that's heavy when it was messy, when loving her wasn't easy, and they stayed anyway. Shelly, Misty, Sarah, Ashley. These weren't just fair-weathered friends. These were the ones answering the phone at midnight when Abby's voice sounded tired, scared, and unsure. The ones who listened when she didn't have the right words, or any words at all. The ones who could sit in silence with her and try not to fix it. Just be there. They saw her at her worst, and they saw her when she was trying. They saw her when she was exhausted, but still pushing forward because her boys mattered more than anything. They didn't come to me looking for attention. They didn't come with polished stories or dramatic theories. They came because Abby really mattered to them. They remember a mother fighting to stay present. She was a woman who didn't want perfection. They say she wanted stability, just a solid ground. They don't claim to know everything. They don't pretend they have the answers because they don't. But they're firm on one thing. Abby deserves honesty, not easy conclusions, not assumptions, not a version of events that simply are more comfortable. She deserves the truth, even if it's complicated, and even if it takes time, even if it makes people uncomfortable. These women are still standing. They're still asking questions, and they're still speaking up when staying quiet could be so much easier for them. They felt the pushback. They felt pressure, and they're still here. Not because they think it can fix it, not because they claim they know everything, but because they refuse to let Abby's life or death be reduced to this silence. These are Abby's angels, not because they're perfect, but because they loved her enough to stay. After Abby was found, something appeared quietly at the place where her life ended. There was no announcement, no press conference. It's just a handmade wooden cross, her name carved into it. No dates, no explanation, just her name. It's not on the roadside either. It's mounted into a living tree, and you have to walk up to it. You have to really mean it. There's purple flowers that rest at the base. Whoever built it was making a statement. They were making sure she wasn't forgotten. And the cross doesn't tell us how Abby died, but it tells us someone cared enough to stand there and leave something that lasts. Her death is officially ruled a suicide, but after looking at the weather, the scene, the evidence, and the gaps that remain, that certainty doesn't sit right. We're not claiming to know exactly what happened, because we don't. But when the truth isn't clear, pretending it doesn't bring peace. Abby was a mother and a daughter, and a woman still trying. 3 little boys lost their mom. They deserve the truth, not this silence. So if you know anything, now is the time. Please call the Perry County Sheriff's Office. Yes, you can remain anonymous. Do this for Abby. Do this for her boys, and do it for the truth. Okay, as we wind up, folks, I want to remind you that everyone named here is innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Death, lies, and alibis is for information and educational purposes only. I'm not a professional. I gather very public information and I present it to you for you to do your own research and form your own opinions. So that's it for this episode of Death, Lies, and Alibis. The story stops here for now, but the questions don't. Cold cases don't fall on their own. It takes attention, pressure, and the willingness to care when others don't. Hit the follow button on the podcast so you never miss the next episode. Join our Facebook group for documents, case files, and ways to get involved, or email me at deathliesalibis@gmail.com. And as always, be safe, stay alert, and never stop seeking justice.